everyone. Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be here. Bienvenue à tout le monde. Merci beaucoup à l'île Maurice pour le magnifique accueil. Welcome to the session Rethinking Tourism for Africa, Global Challenges, or Karibuni, as we say in Kiswahili. Welcome. I am from Kenya, and I actually thought that we had the best beaches. So I have to say the ocean here is truly wonderful. Mauritius is a spectacular place. It is my first time here. I've enjoyed the Creole cuisine. I've had a bit of a chance to explore around the area in this neighborhood a little bit. And of course, I have also enjoyed the sugarcane here. Excellent sugarcane. Thank you so much, everybody here, for your hospitality. We have a lot of important issues to cover today, and we really want to hone in on the challenges the tourism sector faces on the continent, because they are truly significant. Climate change poses an existentialist threat to us all, our habitats, our wildlife, and ecosystems. It's critical that we embrace sustainable tourism practices. So how are we going to do that? Local communities also have to gain from tourism much more than they are today. Infrastructure is still an issue restricting tourism. Political and instability issues, security issues, or the perception of security issues are a problem that can deter visitors. The tourism sector, as we all know, has undergone a significant digital shift. So how does Africa stay competitive? And finally, the pandemic hit tourism hard. So how are we coming back from it? And what health protocols really need to be established going forwards? I have a very distinguished panelist group with me here today, and I would like to introduce them. The very first from my home country, and there will be no bias on this panel, I promise. Well, we'll see. The Honorable Peninah MALONZA, the Cabinet Secretary for Tourism, Wildlife and Heritage from the Republic of Kenya. Karibu, Mheshimiwa. I'd like to invite the Honorable Rhodney SIKUMBA, Cabinet Minister of Tourism and Arts from the Republic of Zambia. Honorable Didier MAZENGA MUKANZU, Minister of Tourism from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Honorable Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim AWAL, the Minister of Tourism, Arts and Culture from the Republic of Ghana. And he promises me that Ghanaian jollof is better than Nigerian jollof rice. But I don't think he's right, okay? So he has a lot of work to do in his ministry here to tell the story of Ghanaian jollof. The Honorable Lisa Singh, the UN Resident Coordinator for Mauritius and Seychelles with the United Nations. And Dr. Nazia Habib, the head for the Center for Resilience and Sustainable Development from the University of Cambridge. Please join us. Thank you so much. Mheshimiwa, I will start with you. I have to. And I'd like to start by asking you, how have global challenges impacted Kenya's tourism sector?
Thank you very much for giving this honor to Kenya. I want to share the experience of Kenya this morning in terms of climate change impact on the tourism in Kenya. As we all know, Kenya is blessed with abundant wildlife, serenic beaches, as well as very scenic landscapes. And tourists are drawn to Kenya because of these attractions. And so Kenya has experienced one of the longest droughts ever experienced in Kenya. And this resulted to death of our wildlife. It also impacted on our waters in the ocean and also in the lakes. So we've seen a lot of increase in the volume of waters, and this has impacted a lot, especially on the infrastructure around the beaches and around the ocean. So we've seen a loss in the hotels, we've seen a loss in our roads, and therefore this has been a serious impact on Kenyan tourism. But beyond this, we've not been stuck to just watching. We had a clarion call where the president called upon the nation, and we came together. And we have devised strategies of impacting, compacting the climate impact in our country. And this is through the clarion call of our President, His Excellency Dr. William Samoei Ruto, where he's called the nation to plant and grow 50 billion trees. We've already started, and we've seen that there's a lot of interest with both private sector and government taking up on the tree growing in our country. Thank you.
So climate being the biggest impact on the infrastructure and the ecosystem that you're describing there. Mheshimiwa, thank you. What about Honorable Rhodney SIKUMBA? What is your view on what the biggest challenge is for you from a macro level?
Thank you very much for that follow-up question. I think for Zambia's perspective, and I would like to contextualize it. So Zambia sits on average of about 33% of the land mass, which is a protected area, and we're sitting on a land of about 752,000 square kilometers. And more so that Zambia is home of pretty much 40% of the water bodies in sub-Saharan Africa. So the concept about climate change really does affect what we do within the tourism sector itself, and indeed agriculture, which potentially is our lifeblood. Now, what we have seen over a period of time is that the impact on the micro rather, is that we have had an increased pressure with the population growing. And this is how you find that because of the growth in population, we're a young population though, we're sitting at about 20 million today. So because of the growing population, it has put pressure on those protected areas. And how has it put pressure on those protected areas is by way of deforestation. You've seen a lot of logging happening in protected areas. You've seen a lot of damming in those pretty much areas where people in the lowlands are not able to access water. Now that in itself has posed a challenge on our nature-based tourism that we hold closely to our chest. Now what does this simply mean is that because the trees are being incessantly cut, the water is unable to be accessed by the animals. These particular animals which actually feed on the wild flora and fauna are unable to now grow in terms of population. And that is how you've started seeing that with climate change, and over and above that rather, you actually see that because we are more of an agricultural-based economy, over and above mining and as well as tourism, it has become increasingly difficult to actually manage some of these things. Just like Kenya, we were faced with a drought not so long ago in 2019, which posed a challenge on one of our natural resources, which fortunately is shared between ourselves and our brothers from Zimbabwe, the Musotunya Victoria Falls. We saw it dry. And at some point I remember, I should have, for the sins of my past when I was in private sector, at some point I started selling it as the Victoria Rocks. So that you actually see
Victoria Rocks.
The Victoria Rocks,
Yeah,
indeed.
I'm not coming for the Victoria Rocks.
No, but look, you can only see those rocks in a lifetime. And that's why we always say, if you come to the Victoria Falls, you actually see it, feel it, and live it. That's the idea. So at that particular point when we're faced with the drought, you actually saw that we could only see the rocks there, which for us, which is a natural wonder of the world, posed a huge challenge on our tourism because it's our draw card. But going back to your question, climate change has actually affected us negatively, not only in Zambia, but I think within sub-Saharan Africa and indeed Africa, of which we strongly feel that we should be able to step up. There has to be a call to action, and the call to action is to see how best we could find ways of alternative livelihoods for the people who seem to be putting pressure on this particular protected area. Okay. And more so, that you've actually seen that because today, the only place in the world, around the globe, which has natural resources is Africa. And indeed, This time around, there's Scramble for Africa yet again.
Let's get the view from the Democratic Republic of Congo and Honorable Didier MUKANZU. From where you sit, what is the biggest global challenge DRC faces?
Merci, Madame de la parole. Je pense que les défis, il faut parler de manière générale pour l'Afrique. Du fait de cette réunion que nous avions hier et pendant cette semaine, nous devrions parler aussi de nos pays et aussi de l'Afrique. Le défi, comme vous le saviez, nous devrions l'Afrique rendre ça la destination du monde. Pour que l'Afrique soit la destination, il faut développer le tourisme, notamment ses infrastructures. Et ça va permettre au monde de visiter l'Afrique. Mais entre-temps, si les infrastructures sont développées, non seulement c'est le monde qui va visiter, l'Afrique va se visiter. C'est-à-dire les pays africains, la population visite d'autres pays. Et aussi, vous le saviez bien, dans d'autres pays, ici je parle de la République démocratique du Congo, qui est un pays de plus de 100 millions d'habitants. Il y a la population qui ne connaît pas d'autres coins. Il y a la population qui ne connaît pas d'autres provinces. Parce qu'avec 9 frontières, la République démocratique du Congo, que nous avions, mais ces difficultés de visiter, ces difficultés de développer le tourisme est surtout liées au manque des infrastructures. Nous, non seulement les problèmes des infrastructures, il y a aussi le problème de l'insécurité qui gangrène la partie est de la République démocratique du Congo, comme vous le saviez, avec le mouvement qu'on appelle le mouvement de M23, soutenu par un pays voisin. Et dans ce parti est, nous avions un grand parc qu'on appelle le parc Virunga. Ce parc-là, nous avions le gorille des montagnes, mais à ce jour, on ne sait pas visiter compte tenu de l'insécurité et on ne peut pas accéder. Nous avions des problèmes, je parlais des infrastructures, par exemple, vous allez dans la province orientale de la République démocratique du Congo, plus de 25 000 okapis dispersés dans la forêt, compte tenu des infrastructures. Et dans ce cadre que je lance l'appel aux partenaires qui est d'abord l'OMT et les partenaires qui accompagnent l'Afrique, que nous avions besoin de bailleurs de fonds, nous avions besoin de développer nos infrastructures touristiques, mais il nous faut des bailleurs de fonds qui nous accompagnent. L'insécurité, le président de la République, chef de l'État, Félix-Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo, tient à ce que la paix et la sécurité soient rétablies en République démocratique du Congo. Ça va permettre au monde et à l'Afrique et aux pays voisins de visiter la République démocratique du Congo avec des potentialités que nous avions de flore, de forêt, comme vous saviez, sur le changement climatique. La RDC est le deuxième pays qui a le flore et la forêt, après l'Amazone. C'est-à-dire que nous sommes pays solution, mais pays solution doit être aussi visité. Et nous avions besoin de la paix, nous avions besoin de la sécurité, et aussi nous avions à ce moment-là besoin de développer nos infrastructures. Ça va permettre, madame, de pouvoir vendre l'image du pays lorsqu'il y a des visites, lorsque le monde visite votre pays. Mais entre-temps, il y a aussi des difficultés de visa qui ne permettent pas aux touristes de se déplacer. Et c'est dans ce cadre-là que nous avions développé des méthodes pour des bilatérales entre pays et pays. Nous l'avions fait avec l'Afrique du Sud, nous avions fait avec la Côte d'Ivoire. On s'est concerté avec les collègues de la Zambie. À ce moment-là, qu'on puisse trouver une solution pour le visa touristique et permettre aux Africains, au monde de visiter nos pays.
Okay.
Merci, madame.
Merci. Let us also consider the global economic context in a little bit more detail, perhaps to Honorable Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim AWAL. How is Ghana experiencing, from a tourism standpoint, the global economic pressure, high inflation, high interest rates, debt servicing, etc.?
Thank you. Good morning, Excellencies, friends. In addition to climate change, I think the pandemic and the Russian-Ukraine war have impacted Ghana and Africa very negatively. The IMF and the World Bank projected that global growth is going to be below 3% this year. Just yesterday, they revised it to almost 3%. It's been 2.1% global growth. And Africa is badly affected. To this extent, Africa has been shut from the global financial markets. It's very expensive to go for loans. And the rating agencies have carelessly downgraded most African countries, recklessly. That has shut us from accessing finance from the global market. What does it mean for tourism in Africa? It means that less investment in tourism infrastructure, less investment in tourism SMEs, and therefore impacting negatively on jobs and growth for young people. According to the United Nations, extremism, poverty is the main cause driving young people into extreme violence. If you don't have money to invest in SMEs, in tourism, infrastructure, that simply means that we're going to drive our young people into extreme tourism. Yesterday, Niger, one other key global factor is instability in Africa, particularly West Africa. There was a coup in Niger. We want to urge the West to stop supporting coup d'etats in Africa. It doesn't help anybody. They should stop supporting coup d'etats and driving young people to violent extremism. Without stable Africa, we cannot drop tourism infrastructure, we cannot get people to come. And because Africa doesn't trade among itself, the commissioner is here, less than 15% of Africans trade among themselves. We rather want to go to Dubai, go to America. No common, it's very easy to get Americans and Western coming to Ghana.
Is that an infrastructure issue more than a desirability issue?
It is economic and infrastructure. Why is it easy for people from America, from Europe to come to Ghana or Africa? We cannot trade among ourselves. We have a population of 1.3 billion people, gross GDP of 3.3 trillion. Yet we cannot rate. Only 50% of us can trade among ourselves. Let's remove the barriers, the visas among African countries. Let us flow. That's the way to develop Africa. So the global financial crisis is making Africa less attractive to global financial markets. We have to access loans at very high rates. Today, more than 18 African countries have inflation, about 40% inflation growth. How do you get cheap capital if your inflation is 40% and above? So we need to have the global financial systems open up to us. We don't have African trade among us. So let's move the hindrances to visa. We can let Africa flow. West should stop sponsoring terrorist groups in Africa. We need peace and stability. And the Western media, all that they do is that they lump Africa as one. Africa is all about insecurity, it's about disease, about corruption. No. Africa has better things to offer the world. Thank you.
I think thank you for all those excellent points. And you've articulated at the end the danger of a single story, as Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie had described, that this is what the continent suffers, particularly when it comes to tourism. And I wonder if the Honorable Lisa Singh, perhaps you could address that. How does the continent grapple with the large challenge of being put in a big bucket list of just there are 54 countries, there is actually just one country. And political instability, for example, in Niger, the Western media and potential visitors think that all of West Africa is burning. So how do you deal with a challenge like that?
Thank you. Yes, indeed. I mean, you have the vision of Africa, especially from the tourism viewpoint, about beaches or safaris, right? But we at the UN like to say that the Africa is more than that. And that this is part of the opportunity that I would want to bring out. One of the biggest transformational agenda going post-COVID in terms of the resilience of the sector, but the resilience of the country is diversification. And for tourism, what it essentially means is how do we brand Africa, but beyond that, there are 5 regions, sub-regions. Each of them have their own cultural heritage, you know, different atu, I should say. So I think it's about making sure in the imaging and branding, you know, and the packaging, this comes out, going beyond safaris, going beyond nature, but also bringing the people dimension, the social dimension, the culture dimension, the art dimension, the cuisine dimension, to give it a more holistic flavor. And the good thing is, I know you're going to ask this question about technology and digitalization. We're in a world where we can message very, very succinctly and very pointedly. We can use this social media, we can use digital platforms to get this message across. But beyond that, also at the local level, ensure that you know, the strategies that we apply have a really focus on unleashing local value chains. Because I sit in Mauritius and Seychelles. I'm responsible for Mauritius and Seychelles. And the majority of the GDP earnings come from tourism that was highly impacted by COVID, no doubt. So, you know, but when you look at who gets the earnings, it's not the little people. It's the bigger businesses, the big hotels. So, you know, we need to really look at that. How do the benefits of tourism really accrue to everybody? And that's where the local value chains matters. That's where the local content matters. That's where also focusing on domestic tourism, which is a very big missed opportunity, I should say, matters. So I know you're going to have follow-up questions, so I don't want to monopolize. Maybe I stop here.
So if I could ask, thank you, Dr. Nazia Habib. I mean, that's a lot of macro challenges the continent faces all at the same time. How do we distill what we've just heard, and how do we prioritize what we need to?
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be among the distinguished ministers, and thank you so much for your candid answers. And as an academic at Cambridge University, I think a tiny 30 seconds of intervention that we had with Ghana's recently, the Ministry of Health and the National Health Insurance, will illustrate the way I would answer this question. So I'm a head of a research center called Resilience and Sustainable Development. We've been investing over a decade of my career, starting as a young academic, thinking through the challenges of deliberation, something that we experienced yesterday, those of us said. And one of the things, and being a young professional at UN at the time when I had to run around Ban Ki-moon's and take all these meetings from these assemblies, when I had the opportunity, my ambition was to actually crack the social sciences methodologies. A lot of the discussion that you're having, a lot of the evidence base that we use in public policy are actually not fit for the purpose of the current situation. Complexity is on the rise, uncertainty is havocing our daily understanding, and the reality is getting camouflaged with a lot of media interventions. So in the face of uncertainty, complexity, and misunderstanding of the truth that we need to go, what we developed at Cambridge is system-based approach applied to political economics theories.
So how would you apply it with this
where,
conversation?
Exactly. So that's where when Ghana talks about the terrorism that is clouding the West Africa scenario, is to think about what are the media channels who are actually promoting those big scenarios to come together and actually have a proper collective deliberation into the power of media, and have the media then come up with a story that is also collectively projecting the positive, not just negative, because perception is very important, and political economics is about power, and the power is about language that you use. The second case study I'll take on Rhodney is on the climate change. That is actually very important on the job and the visa and everything. If you use systems thinking approach, and African Union Honorable Muzamba actually talked about all the initiatives that are happening because it is on the platform of collaboration. Why can't we create common economic zone, not just have it in writing, but actually collectively engage on a policy code level and identify where you can actually have a better transfer price and where you can have a better transactions and reduce the challenges, and not do it on a meeting by meeting. Use a different kind of methodologies so that you can, in a very short period of time, create diagrams of your own policies, because those tools exist with modern technology, and I think you have the AI and blockchain and the big data gave us this capability to, in a very short period of time, succinctly demonstrate where the loopholes are, and collectively then go into a space where you don't negotiate on the winning, you negotiate on the collective gain. And I think this is the key word here on whatever level of evidence we use. If we don't think about the collective gain, we will miss the boat to compete against time. We are not competing against each other. So that us versus them in the media projection, and you madam, is here, so I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Well, speaking as the media, and I'm worried about weighing too much into this, okay? And I would love everyone's thoughts here. It's easy, and I sit on a lot of conversations, to just blame the media, which deserve blame, particularly Western media, because of the lack of understanding, chasing negative stories, not having a true understanding of the context of a particular African environment. But is there more that we can do to tell our stories better, to educate, the Western and other media, in order to be able to tell our stories better? I would be interested to know what you think, and maybe Ghana can weigh in as well, because it's easy to just say, well, Western media is just terrible.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll probably nitpick on what my colleagues have just talked about much earlier. But one thing that His Excellency, the President of Zambia, has coined is that instability anywhere is instability everywhere. And obviously, we do not support any aggressors to any other country. We're all sovereign states. And like my colleague from Ghana mentioned, we shouldn't fight, especially in Africa. We're still Africa. But the departure here in terms of how we're going to grow the sector, you did talk about the economic side of it. I'm happy that we've got the AU Commissioner here. We've got the Secretary General of the COMESA as well, who definitely have spoken towards how best we could trade as one Africa. However, there's one quintessential issue that we need to address, the issue of debt, which obviously is a big yoke on most of us in here. And I'm glad to mention that one of the test case examples that we have in Africa is that of Zambia, of which in less than 1 year, 6 months into government, our government, we managed to secure a debt restructuring of in excess of $6.3 billion. Now, that's a lot of money for any economy. And in essence, what that has simply done is to free up debt servicing savings of about 5.8 billion. Now, that in itself will go towards what exactly we're talking about here, infrastructure. But more so, what is very, very cardinal to us is the social services that speaks to what we're talking about. We're talking about healthcare, universal healthcare, universal education, clean water and sanitation. And that is what we're talking about. That is what is at the core. So in essence, we should be here talking about, I heard my colleague from Ghana talking about if your inflation is 40%, definitely the money is expensive. Wherever you're going to get the money from will be expensive. How do you expect to grow as an economy in the absence of having to restructure that debt? And that is why we're pushing all our colleagues, the IMF, the World Bank, and obviously anybody who we borrow money from, to be at least, well, I probably won't say lenient, but more so to be compassionate to suggesting that we are about to industrialize as an Africa. We are the ones with the resources. So it's very, very important to see how best we could now get to a level where most of our debt is restructured to be able to free up resources for infrastructure, which we're busy talking about here. There is no investor in Africa or otherwise who's going to invest in a place where they can't access. You can't even take your goods to go and build anything. You can't even take water there, let alone electricity. How are you going to grow the sector? It won't happen. So that is something that we need to resolve very quickly and then see how best we could run with it.
What are your thoughts on that, Honorable Minister AWAL?
Thank you. Let's start with the media that you mentioned. I started my life as a journalist. I was a reporter and editor before I moved in. The media sets the agenda. It's deliberate. They go out and tell, I worked in the West, I also worked in Africa. They go out and decide to look at the bad stories still, not the good stories. So the media deliberately go to distort Africa. It's deliberate. But Africa also has a work to do on ourselves. Africa has 40% of the world's natural resources. What do? We export them raw. We need to start adding value. Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire together account for 65% of the world's global cocoa export. It's a $120 billion economy. Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire get only $8 billion. So we need to add value to our exports through industrialization. We need to pay attention to education for our young people. That's why in Ghana, we had what we call free senior high school. 2 million people over the last 5 years have got free access to secondary education. Africa needs to create 50 million jobs over the next 10 years for our people. Otherwise, they go unemployed and they go into terrorism. So in addition to looking at setting the agenda for the West, we need to do one, industrialization, adding value to our commodities, don't export them raw, pay attention to our education, youth education, and they have to develop 150 million SMEs in Africa. We need to make sure that we prioritize them, equip them with resources to grow. That's how we can create jobs.
Dr. Nazia Habib.
I'll quickly pick on one key word that you asked in the question is educate. And we at Cambridge actually done a very interesting research about 7 years ago with the media of the African community to talk about genetically modified crops in the interest of drought-resistant crop. And I think that's an interesting, just a quick case study, just to share that how much more investment we should do in educating all sector, not only just media, also the people in tourism to talk about their assets, so that the stories, when that gets picked up, whether it's a case study for academics or it's a case study for the media, we actually do a more sincere job to the benefit it creates to the economy. And that project we did, we actually trained over 6,000 scientific journalists across Africa, especially Western Africa, where the food security is actually havocing riots in the political space, as to how to talk about drought-resistant, genetically modified crops. And that actually changed later a lot of the policies that now today are embedded in the national food security system. The good thing about media is that you can make change if they are A, educated, B, supported by the government, so that they know that they are respected. And I think the other keyword I'm going to put in before I finish is the keyword for media. While they're profit-driven, the people who risk their life to be journalists, it's not an easy job. I tried it, and I'm sure Ghanaian minister would say that this is something when you do like a politician, you are truly vested, and your dignity either comes through your salary or seeing your story actually making the impact that you want. We have the chance to offer that as a collective good, to create the message that we want countries to forecast to the future, to the international regime. So thinking differently is a very important part of investment you should think about.
Mheshimiwa?
Yeah, allow me to interject on financing for Africa, because I can hear we're still stuck on the loaning system. I believe that it's time, when we have difficulties in Africa, that we need to develop strategies out of the box. And I want to share the experience of Kenya in terms of financing currently, where we've gone out to private partnerships, and we're bringing on the table the private sector to finance projects for us, including even infrastructure. And I want to believe this is a way that Africa must go. Again, I must say that Africa holding that % of the biodiversity is actually the lungs of the world. And therefore, we must take advantage. When we talk about carbon credits and biodiversity credits, these are some of the opportunities that Africa must use so that they can finance their infrastructure. Again, I want also to interject on the African strength as one, because we have already, as Africa, started the AfrExim Bank that we can actually utilize at these hard times and grow our financial strength in the face of the world. Thank you.
Honorable Lisa Singh, I'm just going to take a step back. We've talked about the financial architecture and the infrastructure globally that has very significant challenges for the continent, and it requires and is undergoing, at least in our circles, a rethink of how things need to change, particularly for the continent. But if I could ask you, what are some of the specific challenges when it comes to historical resources or cultural resources that you see from your vantage point, Seychelles and Mauritius, but also looking at the sector as a whole that need to be addressed?
Thank you. Well, Seychelles and Mauritius being SIDS country, you know, our challenge is much more different. I mean, in the sense that, you know, we have a smaller population, unlike the rest of continental Africa, which is a very young continent. You know, it's an aging population. You know, we're far from the mainland, which means transporting goods, services, you know, costs that much more. In terms of the, what is true is like, just like anywhere else, the biggest impact of COVID has been on the debt GDP. You know, it has been really severe. It jumped from around 60 to over 90% in just in 1 year. So I'm taking the case of Mauritius. But we have seen a rebounding of tourists because that's one of the main anchors of this economy. And it has a huge multiplier effect, both direct, indirect, and also induced in all spheres of life, which means that in terms of the SDG, you know, acceleration agenda, it goes beyond just creating decent jobs, etc. One of the thinking that Mauritius has had is, you know, in terms of diversification agenda, there are still some cultural legacy heritage issues, such as the sugarcane industry, right? Which needs to be protected. How do you do that, you know? Although the diversification agenda calls for looking forward, applying forward thinking and systems thinking, as you were thinking about, how do you bring out the interlinkages between sectors? And this is the case in terms of the tourism sector. How do you bring out the interlinkages so that the value chain, the value proposal gets the multiplier effect gets multiplied, you know? There are some aspects here of really thinking deeper in terms of branding. How do you brand this, some of the things? Because you can't go, if you take the garment sector, for example, of Mauritius, you can't compete with Bangladesh, for example, right? On cost effectiveness, but you need to compete in terms of the branding part, in terms of the quality part. One of the big issues we had yesterday, I was in the discussion of the alliance of Atlantic, Pacific, and South China SIDS countries. And this whole issue of investment that is geared towards addressing the key vulnerabilities has come out very loud and clear. And there's a lot of expectation, by the way. I mean, besides the proclamation by the SG on the 500 billion that needs to be unleashed each year for the SDG. Also, how the MVI, you've all heard of the multi-dimensional vulnerability index, how does that also play into effect in terms of the allocation of financing by IFIs? So I think there's a lot of expectation, and we'll see what comes out of it, but this is what I think we need to also collectively lobby for.
I want to ask the Honourable Minister from DRC to talk a little bit to us about, from your vantage point, as you look at the entire sector, regional cooperation and partnerships when it comes to sustainable tourism on the continent. What is your perspective, and what are the key points that we should consider?
Merci beaucoup, madame, de la question. Moi, je pense que c'est une bonne question, et ça a été dit, qu'on doit développer l'Afrique avec des coopérations bilatérales. Mais cela, avant tout, je voudrais ici rappeler que sans la paix, rien ne peut se faire. Et la paix, c'est l'ensemble de tout. Je vous rappelais ici que la République démocratique du Congo, avec ses potentialités ressources, elle se retrouve victime de la guerre. Et cette guerre, c'était une guerre économique. Le président de la République, devant la tribune à New York, au niveau des Nations Unies, il a rappelé au monde que vous voulez coopérer avec la République démocratique du Congo, vous voulez exploiter ces minerais, ne passez pas par les pays voisins, venir au Congo, en République démocratique du Congo, et travailler avec nous. Et vous regardez, je viens de vous rappeler, chaque jour, il y a un Congolais qui est assassiné. Chaque jour, il y a une femme, chaque jour, il y a un homme à la partie est de la République du Congo. Il y a 2 semaines passées, on a assassiné tout un village, 30 personnes tuées, enterrées vivants. Et je vous ai dit, c'est dans cette partie de la République du Congo que nous avions le parc Virunga avec le gorille de montagne, qui peut accepter d'aller investir là où il y a l'insécurité, qui peut accepter d'aller visiter là où il y a l'insécurité. Mais je pense que les Africains, nous devrons nous mettre ensemble. Nous mettre ensemble, trouver la paix, la sécurité, parler de nous. Et avec Francis. Et aussi éviter ces conflits. Hier, nous étions dans la salle, nous étions informés d'un coup d'État dans un autre pays. Mais sinon, comment parler, comment se mettre ensemble, comment développer nos infrastructures, c'est surtout autour des communautés qui nous entourent. Je parlais ici par exemple de la SADC. Avec la SADC, nous avions commencé à initier les déplacements de nos pays sans visa, avec les passeports diplomatiques ou passeports de service. Mais nous sommes en train de travailler avec le ministre du Tourisme de la SADC pour voir comment on peut faciliter les visas touristiques. Et au niveau de la coopération bilatérale, nous avions fait par exemple avec la Zambie, l'industrie des batteries que nous développons, et les 2 chefs d'État se sont mis d'accord. Au mois d'octobre, l'usine de fabrication de batteries électriques, ça va fonctionner. En Afrique, ça sera entre la Zambie et la République démocratique du Congo. Au niveau de la communauté de l'Afrique de l'Est, il y a eu l'engagement d'accompagner la République démocratique du Congo, ensemble avec la SADC, pour la paix et la sécurité règne dans la partie Est. À ce moment-là, notre organisation qui est l'OMT, ce n'est pas pour rien que nous sommes membres. Parce que quand nous participons dans les réunions, on nous parle de fonds, on nous parle de la formation, mais nous ne savions pas ces fonds. On envoie ça où? L'organisation mondiale, notre organisation, doit accompagner l'Afrique. Elle doit accompagner l'Afrique de bonne manière, doit accompagner l'Afrique avec ses partenaires et accompagner l'Afrique aussi avec les projets que nous avions dans chaque pays. Je pense que, en faisant ainsi, ça sera une famille, ça sera l'organisation au service de nous tous. Et non seulement se retrouver, parler, organiser des réunions, mais sinon accompagner l'Afrique, pour que l'Afrique aussi soit la destination du monde. Pour que l'Africain se déplace dans le pays africain. Pour que chaque pays puisse aussi librement visiter son pays et aussi se déplacer pour que le développement du pays puisse naître aussi avec le tourisme. C'est tel que ça a été primé chez nous par le président de la République de développer le tourisme pour que le tourisme donne de l'emploi à la jeunesse. Je vous remercie, madame.
Dr. Nazia Habib, you had a response to what the Honourable Minister had to say. Go ahead.
Honourable Minister, I really love the word that you started your deliberation on, is will. And I'm going to talk about the will as how we have applied through system thinking and political economics on highly indebted countries. So we're currently working with 33 countries of the Commonwealth who are highly indebted. Majority of them are small developing islands and small states. And there is one message that came across out of over 450 mid to senior level executives that we have engaged with, and over 4,000 youth of the Commonwealth is that lack of investable projects. And this keyword, there is lack of investable project, both from the countries themselves that they cannot find to invest in, because most of them is pilots and ends in an entrepreneurial labs or very short burst of excitements that you get comes in. And from the investor's point of view, they cannot find sustainable investable opportunities. But when you get to a system-based deliberative sessions with the executives like yourself, you just talked about the EV batteries, they all know where the potential lies. What is happening in the sphere of debt restructuring or debt to GDP adjustment innovations that's happening, like a nature swap. Seychelles is an example sitting here. Gambia did another one just last week, is that we, the government, needs to work more closely with the private sector to create pipeline of investable projects that satisfy both environmental, social, and governance indicators. All the foreign investors who are looking into invest in the countries that we are working on, they are African, Asians, and Latin American. All of them have to report back to their headquarters, which are most of them are in the US and Europe. They need to provide back ESG-rated investment grades so that they can continue to get the public market money that they are going to invest in Africa. What we are suggesting all of these countries to use a collective pooled approach. It is a very economic approach. African Union would be, and COMESA would be the kind of entities can help, and then create a proper transfer pricing so the inflations that are into your balance sheet does not get transferred out and you are not actually paying your interest rate, A, with the excessive money, B, when you are actually investing in your investment, I see the willingness in the partnership and collectively create a internal market mechanism so that your investors have both the governance trust and the responsible investment trust, and that they can get the value out of their investment as a sustainable way, which they can report back. So if you work through the supply chain, I think, Minister, your will come to an action. Thank you.
What about the point to all panelists here that Nazia addressed, that there is a lack of investable projects? I mean, do you agree with that? Zambia, Ghana, Kenya, Seychelles, Mauritius?
In terms of investment, I think we belabored on that one, where we're saying, for starters, before you invest in a particular area, you need to visit that place first. Before we do business, I want to be your friend. And as such, the culture that has that existed in Africa is that we travel out of Africa, we travel out of the continent. Now, we shouldn't blame us. Connectivity is a headache. It's 10 times difficult to travel Africa than it is to travel Europe. That's number one. And also, because of the whole visa regime, shamelessly so, I will tell you, I've granted free visas for Europe, blanket. But Africa, I'm still having challenges. I'm trying to, my colleagues from Nigeria,
Why
I've got a big delegation of Nigerians coming to Zambia next month. It's a meeting of 1,000 people, 500 of them are Nigerians, and they still require visas. So I said, you know what? Scrap off that visa issues, let them get visas upon arrival. And that is how it's supposed to be. Now, the point being, if you allow a visitor to come to your place, with that eye, they should be able to see what investment opportunities that exist, and it's there. Now, we should be able to now open up. There's no better person to invest in Africa than an African themselves. Why should we be looking outwards instead of looking inwards to invest? We have the resources, we've got the natural resource. We have millionaires, billionaires in dollars in Africa. Why are they not investing in Zambia, in DRC, Kenya, in Ghana? That is exactly what we need to do. We need to start inviting them. But more so, we need to embrace the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. That's the starting point. This thing was going many moons ago. But why is it that we're only trying to actualize it now? And then people start coming to talk about the one currency. How are you to deal with one currency before you can actually even trade amongst yourselves? That is the starting point. So the moment we go past that, it's not even an issue of the chicken and an egg. It's to embrace the aspect to say, can we trade amongst ourselves? I was privileged to see her report with regards to how they're looking at trade amongst Africa. It's a shame to actually see that we are only trading amongst ourselves less than 40%. And my brother from Ghana actually did mention one aspect. Why should we export raw materials? Why don't we value add? And that's the reason why my brother here and I, we've got 70% of the cobalt reserves in the world today. Huge component for batteries, EVs. So the two presidents guided us to say we are going to produce EV batteries here between the two countries. We're going to have two manufacturing plants on both sides of our countries. That is exactly what we want to do. So the Elon Musk of this world will now come to Zambia and DRC and then pick up their batteries for their electric vehicles. That is exactly how Africa is supposed to trade. So colleagues, the moment we start trading amongst ourselves would be the departure of us getting to the next level of our development.
Honourable Minister, yeah, that was great. Some great points there. Do you agree with what the Honourable Minister had to say?
Yes, I do. But investable areas, we have a lot of investable projects. You see, this stereotyping of the West of Africa should stop. We have a lot of investable areas, but they come, that gives us a vicious cycle. Let's break that vicious cycle. You come already prepared that you want to do ABC. That's not our priority. We need to trade among ourselves, like my colleague said, to break that barrier. We have a lot of investable areas. Whether it's in the mining, whatever. You see, you want area, the West one area where they can just what to know. Transfer the profits. Let's have a sharing formula. We have investable projects in Africa.
Is that what you were saying?
Yes, exactly my point.
So
The point is that you have the investable opportunities that you, and that's why I congratulated the EV initiative, because that is a very good example of showcasing how that little number of 40% internal trade, you can convert that and the power is back to your continent.
Well, what was the issue that you were raising
on
investable projects? Because that's what
yes,
you're talking about.
so the lack of investable project to fit the standard of the ESG and the sustainable investment where they have some, and this is where I was talking with the earlier, the media has the role to create the projection of the investable project as valuable as we know as internal members of our countries. And that's the point of departure of the system breakdown. So that's what I was illustrating, why the system is breaking down. When you think through the lens of debt to GDP ratio and all the debt restructuring, and how you can overcome that by creating this internal trade, internal pricing model, and internal currency. That's why I was also referencing that Compassa AU, you have it. The will is what we are missing right now.
So, no, well, maybe, but you see, Africans are developing a lot of carbon products, oil. Now the West is telling us that we should stop that. Renewable energy. How come? Africa doesn't constitute even 5% of emissions. But we are saying that now the paradigm should shift. All those reserves, we should stop exploiting them. We need to create jobs for our people. Now I said I should stop that and go to renewable energy. How can that happen? So if you have your funds, now ExxonMobil is saying they cannot go and invest in that. That is not fair. But what I want to also add is that we must all lobby our governments to put tourism at the center of economic activity. If we don't convince our government to see tourism as a job creator, investment in tourism infrastructure will never go the way we want it. It's very important for us. Tourism, for example, in Ghana, tourism is now number 3rd contributor to GDP. In 2 years, our president has charged us to make it number 1. And we think that by 2025, tourism in Ghana will be number 1 to GDP. Let's lobby and let people know that tourism is a catalyst for development, can create jobs, and empower young people and women to achieve the desired growth. Very important for all of us.
Mheshimiwa, in Kenya, how can we do that, put tourism front and center of our economic strategy?
Thank you very much. Indeed, tourism contributes to 10% of the GDP, and I want to believe that we are in the process. And before I come to that, let me start by a clarion call to Africa, that Africa must listen to herself. Africa must communicate to herself. And Africa must look introspectively to ourselves in terms of the strengths and the synergies that we can get. And I want to concur with my brother here. There's a lot of instructions that we're getting from the Western countries. And I just spoke about the 30% of the biodiversity. and that Africa is the lungs of the world. And therefore, I want to concur with him, even as we talk about, greening and also talk about the emissions. I want us to have a table of equals, as my president usually says, because this is where we have to place all the cards on the table so that we can reason together as a globe in terms of who is contributing what to the globe. Allow me to say that tourism is becoming the center in terms of our economic growth in Kenya. One of the things that we're focusing on is on job creation. And as we all know, one tourist arriving in our country creates actually or impacts almost 7 jobs. And therefore, looking at the contribution that tourism has had in our country, and probably going back before the pandemics, I must say that if we put tourism at the center, you will see the growth on the infrastructure, because basically, if we are to reach the attractions that we have, basically we will grow the infrastructure, we will build the infrastructure around. And therefore, I want to state that Kenya has taken tourism to be center of everything. And that's why you've had my president brand Kenya now as home of human origins. And therefore, we are saying, if Kenya is home...
Why is Ghana laughing about this now? Why are you laughing? Kenya is the home of human origins. Don't you know that?
Oh yes, Kenya is home of, human
not even
origins,
Tanzania.
And everybody came from Kenya. And that's why we are branding Kenya currently. And that means, for us as a country, we are actually removing all the visa requirements. So for you to come to Kenya, very soon you will not require visa, to come to Kenya, because you are coming back to your country. And therefore, we welcome everybody to come back to their country.
Thank you, Mheshimiwa. Let me ask Lisa Singh to just move this forward a little bit and talk a little bit more about some of the innovative strategies that you think are important for all of us to consider when it comes to policies or technologies for sustainable tourism.
Thank you. Thank you. I think there is no doubt that one of the biggest lessons post-COVID is that in terms of the resilience agenda of tourism for the continent, we have to look continental. And I'm glad the Minister talked about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Even for Seychelles and Mauritius, sitting here, there's been a lot of conversation around how we can ramp up connectivity from here to the mainland, not only in terms of knowledge sharing, but also in terms of joint mechanism for marketing the sector. One thing that at the level of the UN we're really concerned with is like the leave no one behind agenda, which is ensuring that the benefits of tourism in the resilience agenda really accrue to the local level. Because ultimately people are, where there's parks, there's people. Where there's animals, there's people. Where there's beaches, there's people. So I think reinforcing this connectivity really to ensure the local content is there. And if you compare the African continent to other similar regions, local content is very poor. And local content is the one which has the value-added multiplier effect, because the tourism revenue earning is not just direct, it's indirect, it's induced, right? I take an example. In Tanzania, I think almost all the hotel furniture is imported from China. In Dominican Republic, 90% is locally fabricated. That's large numbers. I was just talking to somebody in Seychelles, a hotelier. A lot of the hotels, it's a very high-value hotel business. They don't accept local tomatoes because the sizes are wrong. Right? So this is about capacity, training, because everybody can benefit. And what the minister just said, Minister from Zambia, you were talking about how labor intensive the sector is, which means that if you really focus on this, you're going to really get a lot of youth and women, because women proliferate in this sector. in terms of empowering, in terms of resilience agenda. So I think we need to connect these dots, number one, in terms of emphasizing local content. The second thing is I come back to my earlier point about domestic tourism. 2019, 55% of Africa's travel and tourism earnings was from domestic tourism. We need to ramp this up as part of the resilience agenda. And here, this will really impact the medium, small SMEs and MMEs. I was just talking to the Chief Commissioner from Rhodney, which is an island of Mauritius, one of the outer islands of Mauritius. He was talking about how in his homestay, yesterday night, they served calamari sauteed in onion and garlic. This kind of dish you will not get anywhere. So the authenticity, you know, like some of these tailored approaches which give a sense of Africa, give authentic value, authentic experience, but also, you know, mobilize domestic tourists, because they're not going to go, maybe most of them, in very high, expensive. They would like to go where they can take their families, and, you know, you also target millennials. So I think this kind of strategy has to be in place. And the final point I would like to say is, at the level of the UN, we have been working through the Global Compact, where partnership with private sector is very important. We are seeing an increase in appetite from the private sector to go green, because there's this whole aspect of certification. And similarly, you know, with the Global Compact Office, we've been looking at workplace ethical values, human rights, you know, labor conditions, and, you know, applying the sustainability criteria. So I think there's a lot of definitely opportunities in that sector.
And yes, Minister from Ghana, Minister AWAL, you want to add something to that?
So let me just add that we need to develop what we in Ghana call community tourism. We deliberately empower the people at the community level. We just signed some MOUs with communities, local communities in Ghana.
Yeah, just closer, move it closer to you, yeah.
We just signed some MOUs with communities, local communities in Ghana. We gave them last year $10 million as grants, just to make sure that they're able to supply some ingredients and some material that is uniquely Ghana. So that creates experience for our visitors, whether they are foreigners or they are local people. So let's make sure the communities get the tourism dividend by giving them some support, grants, not even loans. They can keep their staff, they can drop their attractions, and they can supply, which is very deliberate about supporting local SMEs. Let's also avoid over-tourism. Some sites in Africa have over-tourism, that there's so much impact on the environment, on the attractions, whilst a lot others are following. So let's also avoid over-tourism so I can have sustainability in that area. Thank you.
So let's hear from DRC and then Zambia.
Je voudrais ici ajouter, madame, que le problème de connectivité qu'on a parlé ici, ça pose problème. C'est-à-dire que vous êtes en Afrique, vous vous déplacez pour un autre pays, mais vous allez faire 2-3 pays pour arriver dans un autre pays. Il y a l'exemple ici, certains de nos collègues sont passés par Dubaï pour atteindre Maurice. Ça pose aussi problème. Et il faut une politique africaine, que les Africains puissent se prendre en charge. Et quand madame intervenait ici, elle a parlé des problèmes de projet. Mais mon collègue a parlé, il dit non, mais les projets existent. Il faut que les bailleurs de fonds puissent faire un déplacement en Afrique. Il faut visiter l'Afrique. Et quand vous visitez, les projets sont documentés, madame. Je donne l'exemple, nous avions un grand projet avec Congo-Brazzaville, donc la République du Congo et la République démocratique du Congo, les deux villes plus proches du monde. Mais ce grand projet, c'est de faire traverser un pont route-rail pour relier les deux pays et aussi 2 grands ports, sur le Pointe-Noire et sur Matadi au Congo central. Mais nous avions initié ce projet, ça fait maintenant presque 3 ans. Moi-même, quand j'étais ministre des Transports, que nous avions commencé à travailler avec les collègues de Brazzaville, Jean-Jacques Bouya. Mais nous avions convoqué la table ronde des bailleurs de fonds. Et il faut voir les conditions que les bailleurs de fonds donnent aux Africains. Je pense que ça va nous donner des leçons de se prendre en charge, de nous organiser entre nous, Africains, et de trouver des solutions entre nous, Africains. Les projets existent dans chaque pays, même dans mon pays. Dernièrement, le gouvernement a créé une redevance, j'allais dire, une redevance pour la promotion du tourisme. Parce que le tourisme doit donner de l'emploi, le tourisme doit maximiser les recettes du budget de l'État. Et pour que le tourisme puisse donner l'emploi et maximiser, il faut promouvoir. Promouvoir le tourisme, il faut développer ses infrastructures. Merci, madame.
Merci. We just have a few minutes left, and so I would like the Minister to just respond and respond briefly, and then I would like a final thought from our whole panel before we disperse for lunch.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll be very quick. So the COVID-19 pandemic came with a silver lining, and to just rebut what our colleague from the UN mentioned, it gave us a realization that domestic tourism is important. Domestic tourism kept the pulse on the business for a very long time. Now, this cut across all African countries, and this in itself requires that we now put private sector at the front and center of growing this particular sector. I believe in here we've got ministers and we've got our officers, most of the technocrats. You do realize that because of the debt overhang that most of us have, we ended up having to charge the private sector exorbitant license fees. The multiplicity of licenses made even our products become extremely expensive. Now, what we should do, which obviously we're doing in Zambia and we should embrace as Africa, is to see how best we could champion and support our private sector. There's no better person who's going to run a private sector than them themselves, because they've got a profit motive. And if we allow it that we hold on to the sector as government, government has no business doing business, colleagues. Allow the private sector to drive the economy. We should be able to now see that the fruits, and governments can only employ but so many. The only person who can employ is the private sector. Capacitate them, and then we should be able to start seeing that the sector itself starts to grow.
Spoken like a good former private sector guy. Yeah, briefly, please.
The silver lining on that as well from post-pandemic is the role of the government. And taking from the immunization to the process where we are today, and all the bailouts that was given out and all the furlough scheme, while I agree with this, and absolutely we need to be more collaborative, the key word again here is the willpower of collectively working and the internal carbon market. So the question was the innovation. The other innovation, I think Africa needs to work together collectively, create a local carbon credit market. And tourism can play a very important role to create universal design for, because there's a lot of infrastructure. 80% of the majority of the investment in the tourism sector are going for infrastructure. Make them universal design so that you can use it for tourists, and also when tsunamis and also natural disasters happen, you can change the facility and use it for other purposes. You can also convert them into hospitals. So that is a design-led innovation, also needs to be part of your investable project strategy, so that while Africans are investing themselves, they're investing for the future.
I would like to give everybody a final word for about a minute each, starting with the Honorable Lisa Singh. What is the most important thought that you would like to leave our audience here today with?
That's a large ask. I think the most important word I can, phrase,
Thought.
few sentences, thoughts I can say is that clearly tourism is a lifeline, is a game changer because of its impact and synergies across all sectors, right? So I think harnessing this requires governments to create the right sort of incentives, and we are talking about private sector just now. What are the kind of incentives that can be created? It requires us to look at partnership broader than just development partners, local partners, so they all have a stake. They all realize the benefit, that they all have a stake and they also gain from it. That's number one. That's second. Third, I think it requires us, and I say this, to think about Africa is a very young continent, because jobs ultimately, in terms of stability, jobs are very important, decent jobs. So I think we need to also think forward in terms of applying foresight. What are the new kinds of jobs? What are the new kinds of areas? How do we mobilize digital technology around it? We're going to move from labor intensive through AI to something else. What is that? That kind of foresight should be applied so that we're better prepared in terms of resilience and anticipation, so we're not going to caught with, because these emergencies, complexities are bound to happen more frequently, so we're more better prepared.
Minister AWAL.
Thank you. Tourism is an important tool for economic transformation. It can create jobs, livelihoods for people. What we need to do in Africa is to form partnerships, collaborate more, remove this obnoxious visa regime, improve air connectivity, so that I can benchmark with the best, ensure that tourism plays a role as a catalyst for socio-economic development. Thank you.
Mheshimiwa.
Thank you very much. My parting shot would be Africa must embrace technology. Yesterday we had discussions on our source markets, and I want to quote maybe Uganda when they talked about reaching out on China. And I want to have the congregation understand that if we had to reach some of these populations, I was just looking at China with 1.4 billion population. Out of that billion, 960 million people, you can reach them through TikTok. And therefore, Africa must embrace technology. It is cheaper, it is less, time consuming, and I believe with technology, we can really embrace the future realities where we can actually market and have tourists, explore our destinations while seated in their countries and probably appetize them to come to Africa. Thank you.
Honorable Minister.
Moi, je voudrais ici demander que l'Afrique qu'on reste unis pour développer nos pays, notre continent. Et je tiens à remercier les organisateurs, vous-même, Madame, notre modératrice, pour cette opportunité qu'on a eu aujourd'hui d'échanger avec nos frères et sœurs sur le tourisme. Et aussi rappeler que notre réunion d'hier, 6 pays ont été désignés ou bien élus pour représenter l'Afrique au niveau de l'exécutif de l'OMT. Aucun pays n'a gagné, c'est l'Afrique qui a gagné, autour de notre organisation qui est l'Organisation mondiale du tourisme. Je vous remercie, Madame.
Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much. My parting words would be tourism gives. Tourism doesn't take away. It's one particular sector that is sustainable and is self-rejuvenating. And I must also make mention that amongst ourselves here, especially we in the tourism sector, ministers, our officers as well, I think let's get in a habit of traveling. Travel Africa. I could probably be bragging in here to say I'm the one who's traveled most of your countries in here. And if I ask how many of you have been to Zambia, you probably won't even raise your hands. It's a starting point. There you go. If you've only got one person. How many have been to Zambia before? No, not you. You see? So now that is where the problem comes in. Now, my brothers from Nigeria, none of them has been to Zambia. But what is important is the more we travel Africa, the more we'll understand what Africa is all about, the more we'll invest in Africa. Colleagues, let's travel Africa for the betterment of Africa.
And Dr. Nazia Habib, last thought.
So I'll pick up the travel, and I'll pick it up with the word connectivity and willpower. And I think my last departing thought is that from the attraction of investment opportunities, whether the money come outside or inside, there are 2 key variables. As a resilience scholar, I will suggest structural resilience and non-structural resilience. Structural resilience, what we understand. universal design. So it's adaptive. Investor always knows that there will be return on investment even at a crisis because it's universal design and structure. Non-structural is the governance, the will, the having that freedom of movement of people and goods and services between the African continent, whether the money comes from inside or outside, the ROI is going to be somewhat protected. And once you can prove that connectivity between logic and the normative and the structural resilience, then we got the whole resilience in place for Africa to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all our panelists for being so wonderful and so gracious. Before we head out to lunch, and I did lie about having to rush out quickly, I want to recognize that there is a very special person in the audience who's celebrating a very special day. It's the Director General of the Nigeria Tourism Development Authority, Mr. Koka's birthday today. So I request that we sing happy birthday. So if you will follow my terrible lead, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to Mrs. Koka, happy birthday to you. How old are you now? How old are you now? Are you now? Wapi keki. Congratulations and a very happy birthday to you. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our lovely panel's discussion session. Thank you so much again to our distinguished panelists for really adding some excellent perspective to what are very challenging and important topics for all of us to grapple with. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the panelists and the moderator for this very interesting discussion on global challenges facing the tourism industry of the African continent. Thank you also to you delegates for staying with us for this first panel. Main announcement, please, we are having the lunch, and can you please be back at 13:30 so that we can resume the second session on time. Thank you for your attention.